My brother secretly took out a loan in my name. He said, "You would have never known." I confronted him at his birthday party and told his wife everything. She left him on the spot. Story 1. I need to get it off my chest because I can't believe what my own brother did to me. It's one of those things where I've replayed it over and over in my head, and every time, I feel angrier and more betrayed. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from it. First, some context. My name is Rupert, I'm 37, and I live in Des Moines, Iowa. Nothing glamorous about me, just a regular guy trying to live a normal life. I've worked hard for everything I have. I've got a stable job in accounting, a good credit score, and a small savings account I'm proud of. I'm not rich by any means, but I'm responsible. I plan ahead. That's how I was raised. Now let me tell you about my brother, Vernon. He's 34, and, well, let's just say he's not like me. Vernon has always been the type to take shortcuts and hope things magically work out. He's bounced between jobs for as long as I can remember, and he always has some excuse for why nothing is ever his fault. Don't get me wrong, he can be charming. He's got that smooth talker thing down to a science. But it only takes about 5 minutes of knowing him to realize he's got no follow-through. Growing up, we were pretty close. He was my little brother, and I always tried to look out for him. Even as adults, I'd help him out here and there, loan him $100, give him a ride when his car broke down, stuff like that. It wasn't a big deal to me. I thought that's just what family did. But looking back now, I can see how I was enabling him. I just didn't realize how far he'd take it. A few months ago, things started to feel off. It started with these random calls I'd get from numbers I didn't recognize. I'd ignore them because, let's be honest, no one answers unknown numbers anymore. But the calls didn't stop. If anything, they got worse, several times a day, every day. Finally, I picked up just to see what was going on. It was a collections agency. They told me they were trying to reach me about an overdue loan. I laughed at first because I thought it had to be a mistake. I told the woman on the phone that I didn't have any loans. My only debt was my car payment, which I'd been paying religiously. But she had all my information, my full name, my social security number, my address. The loan was in my name, and according to her, I owed $20,000. I felt my stomach drop. $20,000. I told her there was no way. I hadn't taken out any loan, let alone one that huge. But she wouldn't budge. She gave me the details, when the loan was taken out, how much had been dispersed, and how I'd missed the last 3 payments. My hands were shaking as I wrote everything down. When I hung up, I was in full panic mode. I immediately checked my credit report, and sure enough, there it was, a $20,000 personal loan in my name, listed as delinquent. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. How could this have happened? Was I hacked? Did someone steal my identity? My mind was racing with possibilities, and none of them were good. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up Googling everything I could about identity theft and how to fix it. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't add up. The timing of the loan, the amount, the missed payments, it all felt too familiar, too close to home. And then it hit me like a freight train. Vernon. It wasn't just a random suspicion. I had reasons to believe it. For months, Vernon had been acting strange. He'd borrowed small amounts of money from me here and there, always with some excuse about needing gas money or covering an overdue bill. He also mentioned once, very casually, that he was thinking about getting into real estate. Something about flipping houses. I didn't think much of it at the time because, well, it's Vernon. He always has some big plan that never goes anywhere. But now, looking back, it all started to click. The missing money. The vague excuses. The sudden interest in house flipping. My gut was screaming at me that he was behind this. I decided I needed to confront him. I wasn't 100% sure, but I had to know. So I called him up and asked if he wanted to grab coffee. He sounded cheerful, like nothing was wrong, and agreed to meet me at a diner we'd gone to since we were kids. I was trying to stay calm, but inside I was boiling. When we sat down, I didn't waste any time. I told him about the loan and asked if he knew anything about it. At first, he played dumb. He even had the nerve to act offended, like I was accusing him of something he'd never do. But I kept pressing him. I wasn't letting this go. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he cracked. He let out this nervous laugh and said, "Look, it's not a big deal. I was going to pay it back. You wouldn't have even known if they hadn't called you." I just sat there, staring at him, trying to process what he'd just said. I couldn't believe it. My own brother had stolen my identity, taken out a massive loan, and then brushed it off like it was nothing. "Are you serious right now?" I said, my voice rising. "You put me $20,000 in debt, and you're acting like it's no big deal? Do you have any idea what you've done?" He tried to explain, saying he needed the money to cover some emergencies and that he was planning to pay it back as soon as he could. But I wasn't buying it. He'd missed 3 payments already, and now my credit was ruined because of his stupidity. I walked out of that diner furious. Furious at him for betraying me. Furious at myself for trusting him. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. A few weeks later, Vernon's birthday rolled around. His wife, Claudette, was throwing him a big party at their house. I hadn't planned on going, but then I realized it was the perfect opportunity to confront him in front of everyone. He needed to understand the gravity of what he'd done, not just to me, but to himself, to his family. When I showed up, the party was in full swing. Their backyard was packed with friends and family, all laughing and having a good time. Vernon was in the middle of it all, holding a beer and acting like he didn't have a care in the world. When he saw me, he grinned and waved me over. "Hey, big bro," he said, clapping me on the back. "Glad you could make it." I didn't even respond. I just looked him in the eye and said, "We need to talk. Right now." When I told him we needed to talk, Vernon tried to brush me off, laughing nervously. "Come on, Rupert. It's my birthday. Whatever it is, can it wait?" "No," I said firmly, my voice loud enough to cut through the chatter of the party. Heads turned. "We're doing this now." He glanced around at the guests, his smile faltering. "Fine. Let's talk in private." "No," I repeated, even louder this time. "This isn't something to hide. Everyone here deserves to know who you really are." The noise died down completely. The laughter stopped. All eyes were on us. Claudette, who had been chatting with a friend nearby, walked over, a confused look on her face. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between us. I took a deep breath, then said, "Your husband stole $20,000 from me. He took out a loan in my name, without my permission, and let me take the fall for it. My credit is trashed, and he thinks it's no big deal." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Vernon's face turned red, then white. He opened his mouth, probably to deny it, but Claudette beat him to it. "Wait, what?" she said, her voice rising. "Vernon, is this true?" He stammered, trying to explain. "It's not what it sounds like. I was going to pay it back." "You've already missed 3 payments, I interrupted. "And now the collections agency is coming after me. My credit score dropped 100 points because of you." Claudette's jaw dropped. "You did this to your own brother?" Vernon turned to her, his hands up like he could somehow calm the storm. "Claudette, listen. I was just trying to save it," she snapped. Her voice was shaking, but her anger was clear. "Do you know how many lies I've already put up with? How many times I've covered for you? And now this?" She stepped back, crossing her arms. "You're unbelievable." The guests didn't know what to do. Some of them were whispering. Others were just standing there, wide-eyed. Vernon was visibly sweating, shifting from foot to foot like he wanted to disappear. I wasn't done yet. "I filed a police report," I said, my voice cold and steady. Vernon's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide with panic. "I've already started the process of disputing the loan. The bank knows it wasn't me, and they're investigating. It's only a matter of time before they find out it was you." You wouldn't do that," he stuttered. "You wouldn't turn me in." "Why wouldn't I?" I shot back. "You've already proven you don't care about me, so why should I care about protecting you? I gave you a chance to make this right, Vernon, and you blew it." Claudette shook her head in disgust. "I can't believe this. How could you do something so selfish? To your own brother?" "I was trying to help us," Vernon said desperately. "You've been on my case about money for months. I was trying to get us out of debt, and Rupert has good credit. I thought." "You thought wrong," I cut in. "And now you're going to face the consequences." The party broke up after that. People left in a hurry, muttering to each other about the spectacle they'd just witnessed. Claudette stormed off into the house, slamming the door behind her. Vernon tried to follow, but she locked him out. He stood there, banging on the door and begging her to let him explain, but she didn't respond. I watched for a moment, then turned to leave. Vernon called after me, but I didn't even look back. I'd said everything I needed to say. Over the next few weeks, things got worse for Vernon. The bank's fraud department investigated the loan and traced it back to him. He'd used my social security number and forged my signature, which was more than enough for the police to get involved. He was charged with identity theft and fraud. Claudette filed for divorce. She'd had enough of his lies and his irresponsibility. From what I heard through mutual friends, she moved in with her parents and started rebuilding her life. Vernon, meanwhile, was forced to sell his car and a bunch of other belongings to pay off his debts. He ended up moving into a dingy apartment on the outskirts of town. And me? I got my revenge in the best way possible, by living well. Once the loan was cleared from my name, I focused on rebuilding my credit and my savings. It wasn't easy, but every step forward felt like a victory. Vernon tried to reach out a few times, apologies, pleas for help, you name it. I ignored him. He'd burned that bridge, and I had no intention of letting him back into my life. Family or not, some betrayals are unforgivable. Now, every time I think about what he did, I remind myself that I stood up for myself. I didn't let him drag me down. And in the end, he got exactly what he deserved. Story 2. My name's Alethea, I'm 34, and I live in Baltimore. My parents split up when I was 7. Mom moved back to Boston, and Dad stayed in Maryland. Growing up, I spent most of my time with Mom, but I still saw Dad on holidays and for a few weeks in the summer. Things were fine until Claudine entered the picture when I was about 12. Claudine is. How do I put this? She's the kind of person who wears fake smiles like a mask. You know the type, overly sweet in public, but behind closed doors, everything she says has an edge. I didn't realize it as a kid, but looking back, she's been trying to edge me out of my dad's life for years. Small comments here and there, subtle digs that were just enough to plant doubt without being obvious. She thought she was smart. She wasn't. Fast forward to now. Dad's 68 and retired, but his health isn't what it used to be. He's not sick exactly, but he's slowed down a lot. I visit him as often as I can, even though it's not easy with my job and life in Baltimore. Claudine always acts like my visits are an inconvenience, even though I go out of my way to be polite and helpful while I'm there. The last straw came a few months ago. I had come down for the weekend to help Dad organize some of his paperwork. He'd been mentioning how overwhelmed he felt about it. Claudine wasn't happy about me being there, which wasn't new, but she was quieter than usual. That should have been my first clue something was up. One morning, I was in the guest room packing my bag to head back home when I heard Claudine talking to my dad in the kitchen. Her voice was low, but the venom was clear. She said, "Alethea doesn't care about you, Clyde. She's just using you. She only shows up when she wants something. Can't you see that?" I froze. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad sounded confused. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "She's my daughter." Claudine wasn't backing down. "Exactly, she's your daughter, and she knows you'd give her anything if she asked. She doesn't visit because she loves you, she visits because she wants your money." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I've never asked my dad for money. Ever. I work full-time, I pay my bills, and I've always prided myself on being independent. The fact that she would accuse me of something like that, especially to my dad, made me see red. I stayed quiet. I wanted to see where this was going. Dad didn't seem convinced. He just sighed and told her, "You're reading too much into this. Alethea doesn't need my money." But Claudine wouldn't let it go. She started listing all the ways she thought I was taking advantage of him. She even brought up the fact that I sometimes bring groceries when I visit, twisting it into something sinister. "She's trying to make you think she's helping, but it's just a show," she said. I didn't confront them that day. I packed my things, hugged my dad goodbye, and left. But the whole drive back to Baltimore, I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. By the time I got home, I was furious. How dare she accuse me of using my dad when she was the one constantly complaining about how tight their finances were. And let's be real, Claudine has always been quick to flash new jewelry or talk about her latest home renovations. If anyone was draining my dad's resources, it was her. A few weeks later, Claudine called me. Her voice was unnaturally cheerful, which immediately put me on edge. "Alethea, darling, how are you?" she asked, as if we were best friends. Before I could even answer, she launched into a sob story about how stressful things had been lately. She mentioned medical bills, home repairs, and other vague expenses that were apparently overwhelming her and Dad. Then came the kicker. "I hate to even ask, but we're in a bit of a bind financially. I know you're doing well, and I was wondering if you might be able to help out, just a little." I wanted to scream. The audacity of this woman, calling me after accusing me of being a gold digger, to ask for money? I kept my cool, though. I told her I'd think about it and get back to her. That's when I decided I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to make a point. I spent the next few days thinking about how to handle this. I knew Claudine's game. She was trying to guilt me into giving her money, probably so she could use it for something frivolous. I wanted to show her, and my dad, that I wasn't the person she was trying to paint me as. I also wanted to expose her hypocrisy for what it was. I did some research and found a local charity that helps elderly people with medical expenses and home repairs, basically the same issues Claudine claimed they were struggling with. I decided to donate $10,000 in my dad's name. It was a big chunk of my savings, but I knew it would be worth it. I made sure to let the charity know I wanted the donation to be publicized. They were thrilled and promised to make a big deal out of it. A week later, the charity posted a thank you message on their website and social media. It included a photo of my dad and a plaque commemorating his generous contribution to the community. They even sent a handwritten note to his house, thanking him for his kindness and support. The fallout was better than I could have imagined. I wasn't there when Claudine saw the post, but my dad called me that evening, laughing harder than I'd heard him laugh in years. Apparently, Claudine had gone into full meltdown mode. She accused my dad of donating their emergency fund without consulting her, and he had no idea what she was talking about. When he showed her the thank you note from the charity, she realized the donation had come from me. That's when she called me. The sweetness was gone from her voice. "Why would you do that?" she hissed. "You embarrassed me." I played dumb. "Embarrassed you? I thought you said you were struggling financially. I figured this would help." She didn't have an answer. She just muttered something about how I should have discussed it with them first and hung up. I haven't heard from her since. I knew the donation had rattled Claudine, but I wasn't done. I wanted to make sure she understood that her manipulation and lies wouldn't work on me, or my dad, anymore. Her silence in the days following the charity fiasco only made it clearer to me that she was trying to regroup, likely plotting her next move. What she didn't realize was that I had already planned my final act. After the donation went public, Dad started asking me questions about Claudine. He mentioned she'd been acting weird and asked if I thought she was hiding something. That's when I realized my revenge could be bigger than just exposing her greed. It could be about protecting my dad from someone who didn't truly care about him. Over the years, I'd picked up bits and pieces about how Claudine handled their finances. My dad, trusting to a fault, had handed her control of nearly everything: bank accounts, credit cards, even decisions about their mortgage. At the time, it seemed harmless. Claudine always insisted she was better at managing money. But now I wondered if she'd been taking advantage of his trust. I spent a couple of nights piecing together everything I knew. Then, I gently brought it up with Dad. "Have you ever looked closely at the bank statements?" I asked one evening over the phone. "You might want to make sure everything's in order." At first, he waved me off, saying Claudine handled it all. But the next day, he called back, sounding concerned. "You know," he said, "I found a charge for a spa retreat last month. Claudine told me she canceled it because we couldn't afford it." That was all the confirmation I needed. I told him he had every right to see where his money was going and offered to help him go through his accounts. He agreed, reluctantly at first, but as we dug deeper, his reluctance turned to shock. It was worse than I expected. Claudine had been siphoning money from their joint account for years: luxury spa days, expensive handbags, online shopping sprees. She'd even been paying for a storage unit in her name. When we looked at her spending history, we realized that her financial stress had nothing to do with medical bills or home repairs. She was living far beyond their means, draining his retirement fund to fund her lifestyle. What made it worse was the storage unit. My dad had no idea why she'd need one, so we decided to check it out. He rented a car and drove there the following week. I stayed on the phone with him the entire time, and when he opened the unit, he found boxes of designer clothes, unopened electronics, and even some paperwork that hinted she'd been looking into buying a property, without him. When he told me what he found, I could hear the betrayal in his voice. "She's been lying to me this whole time," he said quietly. "All these years." Dad isn't a confrontational guy, but this time, he was furious. He waited until Claudine came home that night and laid everything out on the table: the bank statements, the storage unit photos, and her ridiculous spending habits. At first, she tried to deny it. Then, when that didn't work, she turned the blame on him. "You're never around. I was under so much stress taking care of everything." But Dad wasn't buying it. "Stress?" he snapped. "You've been stealing from me while pretending we're broke. You told my daughter I couldn't trust her, but you're the one who's been using me." I wasn't there, but from what Dad told me, Claudine tried to shift gears again, crying and begging for forgiveness. She claimed she only spent the money because she wanted to feel appreciated and said she was willing to make things right. But Dad was done. He told her to pack her things and leave. Claudine moved out a week later. Dad filed for divorce soon after and made sure his lawyer knew all about her spending. He even managed to recover some of the money from the joint account before closing it. As for the storage unit, he donated everything inside to charity, the same one I'd made the $10,000 donation to. When I told him I thought that was poetic justice, he laughed for the first time in weeks. The charity was thrilled, of course. They ended up dedicating another thank you post to him, highlighting the donations and the incredible work he'd supported. Claudine, on the other hand, didn't take it well. She tried to spin the story to make herself the victim, but the evidence was clear. Most of her friends and family sided with Dad, especially when they saw the receipts. It's been a few months since everything went down, and Dad is doing better. He's a little more cautious now, which is probably a good thing. He's even started dating again, not seriously, but enough to remind himself that not all relationships are built on lies. As for me, I still visit regularly, and I think our bond has grown stronger through all of this. Claudine? Last I heard, she was trying to move in with her sister in Pennsylvania, but even her family doesn't seem eager to take her in. I guess when you burn enough bridges, there's no one left to bail you out. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. Claudine thought she could turn my dad against me and take me down, but all she did was dig her own grave. If she had just left me alone, none of this would have happened. Instead, she got exactly what she deserved. And that, my friends, is how you handle someone who underestimates you.